And you'll see in their eyes the light turning on, just as it did the first time they learned to pile one block on top of the other. That kind of educational system. But the only way we're going to get it is not by a formula. I can give you the formulas, as you probably know. What we need is a movement to force society to come to its senses, to cease being a Hamlet, and to recognize that the future of this human race depends upon the educational system we provide. It's not simply a benefit to some families. The foundation of modern civilization is universal education. Our problem today takes the form that the world's monetary and financial institutions are collectively bankrupt. That is, per capita and per household, the income of families, households, has collapsed in physical terms. I'm talking about market baskets of physical consumption, quality of education, quality of health care, quality of scientific and technological services. In that respect, the income of Americans today is about half of what it was 25 years ago. This is reflected in a change in family structure. And many people will talk about family values, but they're hypocrites. Because I recall, as many of us can here, what a family structure used to mean. It meant a family household which was essentially supported by one working member of the family. It was a family household in which the relationship to the children and the neighbors were defined on that basis. It was a family in which the return of a parent, a male parent or others, to the household at evening was occasion for joy. It's not the amount of quality time you spend with your children, as it's called these days, that counts. What counts is whether the child is overjoyed at the prospect of the parent's return to the house after being away. If the child is overjoyed by the return of the parent and has all kinds of happy things to say and discuss with that parent, that is a successful family household, because the loving relationship between the parents and the children is established. So it wasn't the amount of time or the number of things or the number of toys and so forth that you brought home that counted. It was the loving relationship within the household which constituted the essential nurture of the household. And that's been destroyed, because now it takes 2.5 jobs in a family to maintain a standard of living. So those who talk about family values and don't consider these matters are just using words and not addressing reality.
I'd like you to comment on the matter of education, because considering that in order to turn this crisis around, there's going to have to be an enormous upgrading of education in the United States. The question is, how do you get that going when there's so many things mitigating against it in terms of the collapse of the cognitive powers of the population, including the teachers themselves?
The problem we have with education is twofold. One is the problem of the increase of the number of people who have to work in a family household to sustain the income. Now, a child requires nurture, and a babysitter is not a nurturer. Look, most of you have seen young children before they went to kindergarten and became brainwashed. And young children are very intelligent. They learn to do all kinds of things very quickly. And when you watch a child play, if the child is happy, if the child's not happy, he's burning down the house, and that's not fun to watch. But if the child is happy, the child will tend to be constructive in his play or her play with other children or by himself or herself. And you will find again and again moments where you'll see the child working on trying to master something, which an adult can do, but they haven't yet learned to do. And then there comes a time where the child is making a breakthrough. And the child understands, now begins to see how to do this thing that other people do that it would like to be able to do too. And when it does it, you see the explosion of joy in the child. And a parent who understands this will be extremely happy and overjoyed to the point of tears of joy in seeing the child make this breakthrough. Now, this kind of attitude is called love. And this quality of love is not associated with erotica. It's associated not with macho or locker room jock practices. It's associated with the creative discovery and the relationship among parent and child in the nurture of the child to foster creative discoveries, breakthroughs of this type, which on the child level, they seem very simple to us because we learned that a long time ago. But for the child, that is a fundamental discovery, creative discovery, the creative powers. So a child requires nurture. The nurture is the loving environment and support of adults and others in creating the environment which the child experiences this and shares the joy of discovery with adults and with other children, especially adults. This does not work unless there's actual creative discovery occurring. Now, creative discovery is well known. I've described it many times, how it works. There are rules for it. A creative discovery is simply when you break the rules, recognizing that you should have broken the rules, as opposed to when you shouldn't. And this creativity is knowing the difference. All right. So that if you don't have the challenge of a classical approach to education, i.e. geometry and so forth, any child who's not getting a formal geometry education from the age of about 8 or 9 or something in schools is being cheated. There is no education. A child who is not learning language in a proper sense, who's not learning drama, a child who's being given a Dewey type of education is not going to grow up to be a normal, healthy, emotionally healthy adult. Can't do it. So therefore, in education, it's the first level of education is to have the conditions in the household of family nurture, the loving relationship between the parents and the children, in the fostering of creative activity, a school extension of the same thing, which demands creativity of the child and creates a agapic or loving environment for creativity and against other things. And that's what's required. You know, and of those of us who acquired knowledge, even in my generation, when we had much better conditions than people of younger generations had. My education was terrible, but it was far better than anything anybody's getting in these days. But in my time, you didn't get a classical education in school. It wasn't available. You might have had the odd teacher in there who had a moment of classical education. And those were bright spots in an otherwise gray and dull environment. That's my generation, 1920s, 1930s. We didn't get our education in school. We got our education out of school. How? Well, first of all, we had one big advantage. We didn't have television. Therefore, if you wanted to entertain yourself, you had to get in a constructive play. You had to read. And if you read, you would relive great discoveries, exciting things, discoveries. And most of us, 95% of the education of people of my generation came from your private study, which the school was only a provocation for, so to speak. Occasionally you have a couple of bright spots here and there, a good teacher or something, and that was all to the good. Some moments in course were fine. Well, that's the key to it. You have to create the environment in which that emphasis. Now, the other thing that's important for education is ask a child, what do you wish to become when you grow up? That will tell you more things about that child's environment than almost anything else. When I was young, or even when I was not so young anymore, children could answer that question. And they could answer it in ways which were sometimes quaint and amusing, but at least they had a comprehension of what the question was. Today, you ask the question, and children don't even know what an answer means. So you have no orientation to achievement in society of independent individual achievement. You have a politically correct society in which people are looking to the right, to left, to determine from whom they're going to borrow their opinions about every subject. You don't have the sense of independent, inter-directed authority in our children. What is needed, I think, is not how to fix things. Yeah, we don't have to know how to fix things a bit. But you're not going to move the society by coming along with a lot of how to do it, home repair kit kind of things. But you're going to have to inspire people to rediscover again what it is to be human. Just think what a human being is. A human being is beautiful. Why? Even Prince Philip is human. He may deny it. It's probably his Nazi upbringing that had something to do with it. He was trained as a member of the Nazi organization. He was trained to be a Nazi. And he succeeded, actually. But there's no creature in this universe but man which can create. There's no creature in this universe that can change the behavior of its species to improve that species' power over nature. There is no other creature on this universe which can change the circumstances of life to increase the average life expectancy. There's no creature in this universe except man that can conquer disease. There's no creature in this universe but man that can increase man's power per capita over the universe. That every individual who makes a discovery is capable of transmitting to other persons the ability to replicate that act of discovery. That one person thousands of years ago can create a discovery which is transmitted to increase the power and joy of life of people thousands of years to come. There's no other creature on this planet or in this universe that can do that. Mankind is the most noble, most beautiful, best thing in the universe. The Bible is quite clear on that. It happens to be right. The individual person. Now, do you have a society which recognizes that? Do you have a society which can look behind the eyes of a child, not know who the child is, but just look at the eyes behind the child and see behind those eyes a mind which can be developed to do that? A child who properly developed may be beneficial to all humanity? Any child? From any place? Once you lost sight of that, where are you? All your how to fix it books and remedies don't work. And the problem of education is the sense of mission. If you start with the mission of what we are going to make children become, what we're going to help children understand what they are, to have children understand what they have gained in ideas that they can use today from people thousands of years before them, who they can know by name. The child's sense that the child can tell them all about Archimedes, tell them about any great discoverer, and then show the child that the child can relive the moment of discovery of Archimedes or Eratosthenes or anybody else. And the child in that moment knows that that child can relive a moment from the mind of that person, that Archimedes or whoever. Or in music. A child can realize that if they learn, they can re-experience what happened in the mind of Beethoven in composing a certain composition or something else. That once you get that idea in your head that that's what you're teaching, then you can teach. That's educational policy. I'll give you another example, which I was talking about today. Ritalin. Ritalin is an example of evil. Now, you take a child who's bored, is very intelligent and bored, by dumb teachers, dumb classrooms, and terrible conditions. Bored by the fact that at home there is no family life in many cases. Both parents may be working, the stress is great, the child is hyperactive because the child is anxious, insecure, and because they're not being stimulated enough in the school by the kind of material that's being presented to them. Or the chaos in the classroom and the fear of the school ground is too great for them to pay attention. And someone comes along, some teacher or some idiot comes along and says, this child has a behavior problem. They have an attention deficit syndrome. Now, you know drugs are illegal? Dangerous drugs are illegal? No, they're not. Ritalin is passed out by teachers and others who are not competent to pass out dangerous drugs. They're made compulsory. Children are given Ritalin without the consent of their parents in schools on the basis of the opinion of a quack who's not qualified to make that determination. What is Ritalin? Ritalin is a dangerous drug. It has effects which are synonymous with those of cocaine or amphetamines, both of which are illegal to administer to children in schools. But Ritalin is administered. What is happening? The fact that Ritalin is a dangerous drug means that the drugs which are pushed by the teachers have become a drug problem in the schools and the neighborhood. That Ritalin is being sniffed, is being injected, is being sucked, and everything else. And people are trading off their Ritalin doses for money, and teachers have become drug pushers. This attitude toward the student, the Ritalin syndrome, I indicate is a red dye marker of the attitude of the institutions of the education establishment toward education itself. A Ritalin student is not a good student. A Ritalin student is a dumb student who sits there like a cow munching grass because they've been hyper-dosed by a stimulant which results in a relapse into a relapsed state. This is genocide. I'll tell you what it is. It's even more evil than a piece of stupidity or a piece of bureaucratic arbitrariness. Go back and read a book. Read a book from the 1930s, written by a fellow called, a very evil man by the name of Aldous Huxley. A book entitled Brave New World, in which they talk about people who are classed as inferior, who they want to keep quiet as slave, unskilled labor. And that society operates on a drug, which they give to people to quiet down their brains so they will be content and passive in working as unskilled labor in that kind of society. Let me tell you about another book. George Orwell's 1984. Same thing. Let me tell you about another book, a whole series of books written by Alvin Toffler and presented by the would-be Hitler of the United States, Newt Gingrich. It's called The Third Wave. What is the third wave society? The third wave society is described by one of Gingrich's bosses, a man from Britain, Lord William Rees-Mogg, who was the British patron of an American Speaker of the House, or Squeaker of the House if you prefer. Part of the third wave. What's the objective? 95% of the population under information society are absolutely useless. Should not be considered for work. That work and wealth is created by information. Bunk. Can any of you live on a diet of software? Do you require food? Does somebody have to produce it? Do you require clothing? Does someone have to produce it? Do you require medical attention? Does somebody have to be trained for it? Do you require hospitalization, which requires a facility which must be built and maintained, and so forth and so on? They're saying you don't require a physical standard of living. The same thing was said just the other day by the head of the Federal Reserve System, Greenspan, at a speech. So what you're dealing with is not simply stupidity or blundering. What you're dealing with is evil.
This might make a lot of teachers mad, but I believe this too. I think she should be productive in her class. And if she is productive in her class, first I think they should, once they hire, they should give her a good salary. Then as she progress in her classes. If her class progressed, then I think she should be rewarded for, and when I say rewarded, I'm talking about money. I think she should have an increase. If they do not perform, I think they should have a decrease. And if they decrease too much, I think they should be out. That's one. And then another one. Okay.
Well, just first of all on teaching. My belief on teaching, and I had a long war with education. If I hadn't had war with education, I'd have been dumb. Because I fought these people on these issues. The principle of education is what I've said. You must hope that the child relives, reenacts the mental act of original discovery in themselves. Then they know what they're doing. All education must be based on that, which means you must take a list of the great discoveries of mankind and put them in an order in which a child can learn them. Right? Therefore, you start with one. That's the precondition for going to the next and going to the next and so forth. Now, a teacher is a person who understands how the child's mind develops, if they're properly trained, and is able to go through that process with lesson plans which, in effect, structure the situation so the child is given a paradox and is able to solve the problem. Thus, the child comes out of each class with knowledge, not with learning. Now, to do that means the teacher has to engage in the student population actively, which means the recommended size of a class, I would say, is 15 students, not more. Because what you have to do, if you're going to do that, you have to go around as a teacher to evoke from each of the children what they're not all the same every class, but you have to get among the children to get an interplay among the children in the class. If you don't get the interplay, they're not going to interact, and you're not going to have a successful class. Therefore, if the class size is too large, you cannot evoke the interplay. In other words, a teacher is not projecting ideas, learning at the student like a used car salesman on television, who can project lies to millions of people simultaneously, and the more the merrier. Right? But we're not trying to put used car salesmen in schools just to get them out of crookedness on the used car lots. So in that case, you have to have an interplay among the students. Therefore, you must limit the class size so the teacher can interact with all the children. Those of you who have large families know what that means. The interaction with a large family of children is difficult. And the nurture. Same thing for a teacher. All right. So therefore, there must be a humanist principle of education, which is this kind of education, the Platonic tradition education. And everyone must get that kind of education, which they're educated not to learn, but to know. Right. Fine, now on the railroad.
Let me ask you this. Do you think the teacher also should have a little flexibility to go on her own or his own?
If the teacher's bright,
right.
If the teacher's bright and is qualified, you let them innovate.
Right.
No, that's not a problem. As long as they achieve the objectives, the learning objectives, and the lessons plans make sense, that's all right. Don't try to do too many incentives. Because, see, the great incentive. Now, remember children. You've had children, I bet.
Yes.
Okay, fine. Now, remember when the child is 1, 2, and 3 years of age. Remember when the child is playing with blocks, like a simple thing like trying to pile one block on top of the other?
Yes.
And when the child first tries it, they can't do it. And the child one day learns how to do that, begins to get onto it, and the child becomes immensely excited, joyfully excited that they've made a discovery. And you go through that with young children, you see that. Now, what you're seeing is this child is doing what Einstein or Archimedes or so forth did. They're using creative powers of reason to discover principles, not sensations, but principles. So that you're seeing creativity. Now, what we want to do is to utilize and never let that stop. What we do now is we say, okay, you've been creative long enough, you're 5 years old, shut up and do as you're told. We send them to school, we crush them. We crush their spirits. If they think too much, we give them Ritalin. Right? That's what happens. So what we need is a humanist program of education which does that kind of involvement. You don't need incentives because there's nothing as great an incentive for a teacher as the pure joy of a successful relationship of this kind with students. All you do with the teacher is make sure the teacher is taken care of. You want the teacher not to worry about the bread on the table. You want the teacher to do the job, to concentrate and sense of being a professional. Paid enough, they forget about money, they've got enough money to live on, they're comfortable, they're doing their job, and their pleasure and motivation is not a financial incentive. Their pleasure is the pure joy of seeing little minds' lights turn on.
I'm just a mother. I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and my concern is at home. I'm trying to raise my boys as well as I can. So my question was going to be something the other gentleman touched on, which was education.
Yeah.
We're talking about now, where do we send our boys to school? What kind of things should we focus on changing? Because I don't want their spirits crushed, and they're my primary concern. Then the next piece would be, what can little people like us do to help affect change that intelligent people do get into office?
Well, here I am. No, I mean, as you may perceive, I'm not concerned so much with running for office, though I'm very serious about running for office. At my age, you cannot afford to waste time on things you're not serious about. But the point is, I'm not interested in some, people treat election campaigns like they were sports events. Who won the thing, who got the gold medal. And I don't know whether you call that gong show on the Republican side a sports event or not. It's all going to come down to dole. They're all going to be gonged out pretty soon. We had Phil Graham go to milligram and then to microgram and then to nanogram. But I'm in the process of making a revolution by trying to evoke from the American people a movement which is based on the kinds of things I've discussed. The problem, we got two problems. Number one, people say, let's blame government. Let's blame those in power. I know all about that. I've seen that. That's not the problem. The problem, people aren't willing to sacrifice something else, which I'll be dealing with this Saturday. The case of Hamlet, as I'll deal with this Saturday, just in passing and dealing with something else, which is advertised. Hamlet, the great tragedy, which is the tragedy of us all. We could call it the President Clinton as Hamlet. Now think about President Clinton as Hamlet, or a potential Hamlet, who can go down in blood the way Hamlet did in the drama. And think of Shakespeare as a great artist, not an entertainer, but a great thinker, a great artist, a master tragedian. Now here's Hamlet. Hamlet, you start this scene on the parapet. And these two guards are talking on the parapet of this Danish palace. And that's not Danish the kind you eat, it's another kind. And in comes Hamlet into the picture, and he thinks he sees the ghost of his dead father. And he wonders if the spirit I've seen is real or if it's some trick of the devil to deceive him. And you see in that moment the germ of a conflict. Then you come along toward the end of Act 2. And Hamlet has brought some players on to rehearse them to see if they can act this play about Hecuba. And the players leave, and they've exhibited great passion. And he says, I wonder if this player here who just left the room here wept. Could he weep for Hecuba? Could I weep for Hecuba? What is Hecuba to him? Yet I peak like John of dreams, unpregnant of my cause, and can do nothing. I must be pigeon-livered and lack gall to make oppression bitter. Or I have fattened the region kites with his slaves often, referring to his enemies. Then it comes to the next act. There's an opening scene, and Hamlet goes to this famous soliloquy, to be or not to be. And there's a very interesting double play here it goes on. To be or not to be, that's the subjunctive. That's not in the indicative case, mood. It's a subjunctive mood. This state or that state. To be or to be. Two different states of mind. What are the two states that we find out in the unfolding of this soliloquy? In one state, there's death, the bourne from which no traveler has returned. But that's not the only issue. It's not he's just afraid of dying in the struggle. Something else. To be dead or alive, or to be something else. We would rather bear the ills we have than those we know not. And so Hamlet, in this point, has made a decision to die. And he says to Ophelia, "Get thee to a nunnery, go. I have nothing more to do with you. I'm dead, I'm doomed. I've made the decision to doom myself because I would rather bear the ills I have than those of which I know not." And that's typical American. That's Clinton as his pragmatic worst. Rather bear the certainty of winning the next election than worrying about the fate of the nation or the world. And it might come to the point he realizes, yes, maybe the world's monetary system is doomed, but I can't say that. I can deal with this because this is something I can understand, or my pragmatic friends in the DNC, or my campaign advisors can understand, or the Democratic Party, otherwise, or in the Congress. And I'm going to cling to these trodden, acceptable ways to win an election, even if it means the death of the United States, because I dare not risk that which I do not understand. And that's the problem with most American people, not Clinton. Clinton is a leader. He's elected to be a leader. The nation is in great trouble, as was the nation of Denmark in the time of Hamlet. But Hamlet, who's the leader who might have changed the destiny of the nation, could not act because he could not go from the habitual to the unknown, the uncertain. And so that's Clinton's problem right now. That's his Hamlet problem, which I've got to get him out of because he's president. Otherwise the whole nation can go, as in the last act, the last scene of Hamlet. A bloody carnage, they're all dead. The problem lies with the people, because there's leadership and there's the people. Are the people willing to look in themselves and see what it was in them, which, as I've said repeatedly, step by step, drop by drop, drip by drip, over the past 30 years, the American people have drifted into conventions and accepted ways of doing things which have now brought us to the point of destruction. Not because Washington imposed it upon them, but because they voted for the people who did it. They voted to support the policies which they curse, whose results they curse. Can I get people to look in themselves and see the evil in themselves? The Hamlet in themselves. Because if I can't do that, I can't get the American people to make the kind of decisions which they must make in choosing leadership to get us out of this mess. They won't even respond to a competent leader. They would rather die as a nation than respond to a competent leader who challenges them to give up those habits of belief by which they are being destroyed. So that's the problem. Now that you talk about education of the children, the same thing. The problem you have when talking about a program of education is you live in a society where everybody around you is corrupt. Many people have anxiety about their children, but very few people are willing to face the questions which are involved pertaining to that anxiety. They say, I want a good education. Parents will say, I'm sending my child to a religious school because I don't want him raped, even though the education is inferior. So what we have here is we have people are looking for alternatives in fleeing from the essential reality. We don't have an educational system in America. And what we have to do is, if you want something in life, my impression is you have to create a movement for it. You look at civil rights. You had a great leader, Martin Luther King. He was a very obscure fellow at one point. In a few short years before he died, a hero and almost a saint. But he was a leader. And he created, because he was a leader, he made a movement out of a movement and carried it when it was ready to fall. He'd pick it up with his leadership and carry it another step. And he wasn't there one day. And there was no one else who could carry that movement another step. And it stopped. It has not progressed since Martin was killed. Not a step of progress in the civil rights movement since Martin died, because there was no movement. We need the same thing, movement in education. Sure, they're formulas. You know, you can read our material, you probably know of it, on education. Yeah, there are formulas as to what a good education should be. The problem is how to get it. We don't have the teachers. We don't have the institutions. We have nothing. You have children who are precious to you. Okay, we've got to move fast. We just have to, in the process of the kind of thing we're trying to do, we're talking about tonight, create a movement using the Democratic Party simply as the rallying stick to bring people together who are concerned about these things. Break the power of that crusty bureaucracy on top of the campaign organization, the DNC. Turn this party loose. Determined to build a revolution in the condition of man. Go back to what the nation was intended to be. In the process, understand what education is. To take these little boys, these little children, and hope that each step they're going to have a rich new experience in life of understanding. They will be protected. They won't be brutalized. They will have a chance to do it. And they'll come home happy. And you'll be happy, and they'll be happy. You'll be happy to see them, and they see you. And you'll share what they've gone through, and you'll be happy. Because it's like watching them building with blocks or something, making breakthroughs. And they'll come back and they'll do the same thing with you, what they learned in school today. Or what somebody else learned in school today. And you'll see in their eyes the light turning on, just as it did the first time they learned to pile one block on top of the other. That kind of education system. But the only way we're going to get it is not by a formula. I can give you the formula, as you probably know. What we need is a movement to force society to come to its senses, to cease being a hamlet, and to recognize that the future of this human race depends upon the educational system we provide. It's not simply a benefit to some families. The foundation of modern civilization is universal education. People do that it would like to be able to do too. And when it does it, you see the explosion of joy in the child. And a parent who understands this will be extremely happy and overjoyed to the point of tears of joy in seeing the child make this breakthrough. Now, this kind of attitude is called love. And this quality of love is not associated with erotica. It's associated not with macho or locker room jock practices. It's associated with the creative discovery and the relationship among parent and child in the nurture of the child to foster creative discoveries, breakthroughs of this type, which on the child level they seem very simple to us because we learned that a long time ago. But for the child, that is a fundamental discovery, creative discovery, the creative powers. So a child requires nurture. The nurture is the loving environment and support of adults and others. In criticism, twofold. One is the problem of the increase of the number of people who have to work in a family household to sustain the income. Now, a child requires nurture, and a babysitter is not a nurturer. Look, most of you have seen young children before they went to kindergarten and became brainwashed. And young children are very intelligent. They learn to do all kinds of things very quickly. And when you watch a child play, if the child is happy, if the child's not happy, he's burning down the house, and that's not fun to watch. But if the child is happy, the child will tend to be constructive in his play or her play with other children or by himself or herself. And you will find again and again moments where you'll see the child working on trying to master something, which an adult can do, but they haven't yet learned to do. And then there comes a time where the child is making a breakthrough. When the child understands, now begins to see how to do this thing that other has all kinds of happy things to say and discuss with that parent. That is a successful family household, because the loving relationship between the parents and the children is established. So it wasn't the amount of time or the number of things or the number of toys and so forth that you brought home that counted. It was a loving relationship within the household which constituted the essential nurture of the household. And that's been destroyed because now it takes 2.5 jobs in a family to maintain a standard of living. So those who talk about family values and don't consider these matters are just using words and not addressing reality.
I'd like you to comment on the matter of education, because considering that in order to turn this crisis around, there's going to have to be an enormous upgrading of education in the United States. The question is, how do you get that going when there's so many things mitigating against it in terms of the collapse of the cognitive powers of the population, including the teachers themselves?
The problem we have with education is of physical consumption, quality of education, quality of health care, quality of scientific and technological services. In that respect, the income of Americans today is about half of what it was 25 years ago. This is reflected in a change in family structure. And many people will talk about family values, but they're hypocrites. Because I recall, as many of us can here, what a family structure used to mean. It meant a family household which was essentially supported by one working member of the family. It was a family household in which the relationship to the children and the neighbors were defined on that basis. It was a family in which the return of a parent, a male parent or others, to the household at evening was occasion for joy. It's not the amount of quality time you spend with your children, as it's called these days, that counts. What counts is whether the child is overjoyed at the prospect of the parent's return to the house after being away. If the child is overjoyed by the return of the parent, and you'll see in their eyes the light turning on, just as it did the first time they learned to pile one block on top of the other. That kind of educational system. But the only way we're going to get it is not by a formula. I can give you the formulas, as you probably know. What we need is a movement to force society to come to its senses, to cease being a hamlet, and to recognize that the future of this human race depends upon the educational system we provide. It's not simply a benefit to some families. The foundation of modern civilization is universal education. Thank you. Our problem today takes the form that the world's monetary and financial institutions are collectively bankrupt. That is, per capita and per household, the income of families, households, has collapsed in physical terms. I'm talking about market basket.